Have you ever felt like something inside you always ruins the good parts, like the moment joy knocks? Something in you slams the door, you fall in love and push them away. You land the dream job and suddenly stop showing up. You promise change and break it quietly when no one's watching. What if I told you it's not because you're weak? It's because you're divided. There's a version of you still hiding, still protecting you the only way it knows how, not with logic, but with sabotage, and it's not trying to hurt you. It's trying to keep you safe from the pain you once couldn't name. There's a reason you keep running, and it's not because you're broken. It's because no one ever taught you how to stay with your joy, stay with your love, stay with yourself. There's a story I want to tell you, and if you're still here, maybe it's the one part of you's been waiting to hear. Ethan always had a gift for disappearing, not physically, but emotionally. The moment something in his life felt like it was finally working, he'd vanish. Love, he'd grow cold, distant, busy. Success, he'd procrastinate, miss deadlines, pick fights with his boss. Commitment, he'd suddenly need space. Even from people he loved. He didn't understand it at first. He just thought maybe he was wired wrong. Maybe he wasn't built for happiness, because every time he touched it, it slipped, like trying to hold water with bare hands. The worst part, he wanted these things. He longed for them, he cried for them, and yet he kept ruining them. He couldn't explain it. His friends said he was too sensitive. His family called him inconsistent. His own voice. Cruelest of all, you're just not enough. You always screw things up. You don't deserve this. It wasn't loud, it was constant, a quiet drip in the back of his mind, until he started to notice the pattern, always the same, something good, then fear, then sabotage, then shame. He tried harder, set more goals, read more books. But the more he tried to force himself to change, the more he stayed the same. He didn't lack discipline, he lacked understanding. Because no one had ever asked him the real question. What if you're not sabotaging because you're lazy? What if you're sabotaging because you're scared, not scared of failure, but of being seen, of being chosen, of being loved and losing it? That question haunted him, not like a ghost, more like a mirror held up at the worst possible moment. Because here's the truth, sometimes we don't run because we're broken. We run because we were never taught how to stay. Stay when it's safe. Stay when we're loved. Stay when we're worthy. Ethan's story doesn't begin with trauma. It begins with silence. The kind of silence where fear grows roots, where shame makes a home, and where a child learns quietly. If I disappear, I won't be hurt. And he carried that rule into adulthood, like a secret pact with a younger version of himself. But even secrets grow heavy, especially when they keep you from what you want most. And one night, sitting alone in his car after canceling a date for the third time that month, something cracked. Not loudly, just enough to let a memory in. A memory he hadn't touched in decades, but one that had been shaping every decision he made. And in that moment, he didn't vanish, he listened. And that's where everything began to shift. What's the first memory you have of being told you were too much, too loud, too emotional, too intense, too honest? For Ethan, it was fourth grade, the school talent show. He had practiced for weeks, writing a goofy song, memorizing lines, dancing in the living room. He wanted to make people laugh. That was his superpower, or so he thought. But when he got up on stage halfway through his act, the principal whispered something to another teacher. They laughed, not loudly, but loud enough. And when he walked off stage, flushed and breathless and proud, he saw it, the smirk on his teacher's face, the forced clap, the sideways glance. Later that week, his mom told him maybe next time he could just read a poem instead. He didn't understand why, but he felt it. Something in him shut down that day, not out of defiance, out of confusion. It wasn't the rejection that hurt most, it was the loss of something he didn't yet have words for. Permission. The permission to be himself. And from that day on, every time he felt joy rising, he scanned the room. Every time he laughed too loud, he checked for disapproval. Every time he felt love, he braced for impact. He became a master of anticipation, not because he was cautious, but because he was wounded. And when you don't feel safe being who you are, you learn to be who others want you to be: quiet, pleasant, manageable, safe. But here's the problem: the parts you push away don't disappear, they hide, and from the shadows they watch, they wait. And one day they return, not as villains, but as saboteurs, not because they hate you, because they miss you. They miss being seen, heard, loved. This is where Ethan's journey really begins, not with a dramatic event, but with a simple question: what if the parts of me I buried are the ones trying to protect me? It was in therapy, his third session, that the question surfaced. His therapist asked, "What would happen if you stopped performing and just felt?" The room went quiet, his chest tightened. His throat closed, he laughed instinctively, trying to break the tension. But it didn't work this time, because something in him had stopped laughing back. That night he sat at his kitchen table, opened his journal, and wrote, "To the part of me that hides." The ink trembled, but the words came anyway. "I'm sorry I made you go quiet. I'm sorry I only loved you when you made people happy. I miss you." It was the first honest conversation he'd had with himself in years, not to fix, just to feel. If you've ever done this, even once, you know the power it holds. And if you haven't, maybe this is the moment you start, if this stirred something in you. Leave a comment below. I remember the moment I went quiet. You're not alone. And neither is the part of you waiting to be heard, because sometimes the most powerful healing begins with a whisper to the past. Ethan thought healing meant effort, that if he just tried harder, read more, meditated longer, he could finally fix the part of him that kept messing things up. But no matter how many mornings he journaled, or how many affirmations he whispered into the mirror, he still froze when things got good, still panicked when someone loved him too much, still sabotaged, quietly, efficiently, almost politely. He didn't yell. He didn't explode. He just disappeared. From joy, from connection, from himself. It made no sense to him. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't careless. He was actually exhausted from trying so hard. That's when his therapist introduced a new word: shadow. Ethan didn't like it at first. It sounded mystical, vague. But as they talked, something clicked. Jung didn't describe the shadow as evil. He described it as unseen. Everything you deny in yourself, every anger you hide, every fear you suppress, every need you silence, it doesn't vanish. It just goes underground, into the shadow. And from there, it does something unexpected. It protects you, not rationally, but loyally. It becomes a kind of guardian for the child you used to be. And like any loyal protector, it will do anything to keep that child from being hurt again. Even if that means burning down your happiness, even if it means destroying the love you finally found. Because if love once meant pain, then safety means isolation. And the shadow knows how to deliver isolation perfectly. Ethan began to see it, how he'd unconsciously pull away, cancel plans, delay decisions, nitpick others until they pulled back, not because he wanted to, because some part of him believed. Better lonely now than broken later. It wasn't weakness, it was preparation. A life built around preemptive grief. He had been rehearsing loss before love even arrived. That realization broke something in him, and rebuilt something else. What if the shadow isn't the enemy? What if it's a bruised protector doing its best, trying to keep you from the moment everything falls apart? That's what Ethan had been doing. He wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of joy that doesn't last, afraid of being seen, then abandoned, chosen, then replaced, celebrated, then mocked. So he beat everyone else to the punch by walking away first. That's not self-destruction, that's defense. Not irrational, just misdirected, wounded logic dressed as self-control. And here's the painful part. The shadow doesn't listen to your goals. It listens to your wounds. It remembers where you bled. And it will do anything to make sure you don't bleed there again, even if that means keeping you from the life you say you want. That's what Ethan learned in that third month of therapy. It's not enough to set goals. You have to meet the part of you that's afraid of those goals coming true, because dreams fulfilled it can be terrifying. If you've only ever known survival, and that's when the real work begins, not pushing harder, but listening deeper to the voice that says, I'm not trying to ruin things, I'm trying to keep us safe. The first letter Ethan wrote began with shaking hands. To the part of me that panics when someone loves me. He paused, swallowed hard, and kept going. I see you now, and I know you've been trying to protect me. His therapist had suggested it gently. What if instead of fixing your fear, you wrote to it? He didn't think it would help, but he was willing to try anything. So he wrote to the rage that surfaced when he was criticized, to the shame that gripped him in moments of joy, to the fear that tightened his chest every time someone got too close. Each letter, a conversation he had never dared to have, not with a person, but with himself, not the polished version, not the motivated one, the one that hid in bathrooms at parties, the one that made excuses to not fall in love, the one that felt safer in loneliness than in the spotlight. He wrote with no grammar, no filter, just raw, unedited truth. Rage, he wrote one night. I've hated you for years. You've ruined so many moments, but maybe you were just trying to say, I'm hurting. Shame, I thought you were weakness. But you were trying to keep me invisible because visible once meant humiliation. Fear, you show up uninvited, but maybe you've been standing at the door this whole time saying, don't go in there, it's dangerous. He didn't realize it then, but something in those letters was shifting, not immediately, but gently. It was as if the parts of him that had been screaming finally whispered back and said, thank you. Thank you for not silencing me this time. Thank you for asking instead of exiling. Thank you for listening. The change wasn't dramatic. He didn't suddenly become fearless. He still got nervous, still had spirals, still overthought texts and hesitated before saying, I love you. But something subtle began to grow, trust, not in the world, in himself. The letters became rituals. He'd light a candle, play soft music, and write, sometimes for hours, sometimes just a line, but always the same intent, not to fix, to welcome. Because healing, he learned, isn't about replacing broken pieces. It's about inviting them to the table, letting them eat, letting them speak, letting them belong, even rage, even shame, even fear, especially fear. And in doing that, Ethan noticed something strange. He wasn't fighting himself anymore. He was meeting himself fully, tenderly. And in that tenderness, he found a strength he never expected, a quiet knowing that said, I don't have to run because I'm no longer running from me. It was late autumn when Ethan finally saw it, not in a journal, not in a therapy session, but in a quiet moment, waiting at a crosswalk. He watched a father kneel beside his crying daughter. He didn't hush her, he didn't pull her away, he simply knelt and stayed, and something broke inside Ethan, because in that moment he saw himself, not as the man crossing the street, but as the little girl crying, wanting nothing more than for someone to kneel beside him and stay. That was the moment it clicked. His self-sabotage wasn't rebellion. It was loyalty to a younger self who had been told, quiet down, be less. Don't be dramatic. So he listened, he became less, quieter, invisible. He wore masks so well, even he forgot where his real face was. But beneath every retreat, behind every ruined relationship, every missed opportunity, every vanishing act, there was a whisper. I'm just trying to protect us. And once Ethan heard that whisper clearly, he couldn't unhear it. He started noticing it in everything. The tightening in his chest before a date, protection. The sudden urge to cancel plans when someone praised his work, protection. The avoidance of intimacy, protection, not sabotage, not dysfunction. Just outdated protection. Still running the show, he began to speak to it, out loud, sometimes softly, like you'd speak to a scared child hiding under a table. I see you. I know you're scared. But we're safe now. And slowly that inner protector began to relax, not disappear, not transform overnight, just relax. And in that relaxing, Ethan felt space. Not for control, but for compassion. Because when you see your shadow as a saboteur, you fight it. But when you see it as a protector, you forgive it. You invite it in, you say, come sit with me. You don't have to guard the door anymore. That shift changes everything. It changed how Ethan worked. He no longer set goals to prove his worth. He set them to express himself. It changed how he dated. He no longer needed people to validate him. He wanted to connect, just because it felt good. It changed how he looked in the mirror. He stopped critiquing, started acknowledging, started saying, I know why you do what you do, and I love you for trying. That love didn't make the fear vanish, but it made it softer. And in that softness, he found the one thing he'd never been given: permission, not to perform, not to be perfect, just to be. And maybe that's what your protector needs too, not more rules, not more motivation, just one quiet sentence. I know you meant well, and I'm ready to take it from here. Ethan used to dream big. Launch a podcast, write a book, fall in love and stay. He wanted all of it. But every time those dreams got close, something inside recoiled. Not out of laziness, out of fear. Not fear of failure, fear of success. It sounded strange when he first admitted it. How could anyone be afraid of the very thing they desire? But the more he listened to himself, the more he realized success meant being seen meant being exposed, and being exposed once meant being hurt. He remembered high school, winning a writing competition. His story was posted on the hallway wall. He felt proud, until he overheard a classmate say, he's so full of himself. It was a throwaway comment, one sentence. But it left a crack, and that crack never really sealed. So as an adult, every time he stood in front of something good, the voice returned. Stand out. Don't get too visible. I'll find something wrong with you. His shadow wasn't blocking him from success. It was shielding him from potential shame, a preemptive strike against judgment. Because if he never truly tried, he'd never truly fail. And that seemed safer until it wasn't. Until the silence became heavier than the fear. And that's when he asked himself a question that changed everything. What am I afraid would happen if I actually succeeded? He sat with that, let it echo. What am I afraid of? Being envied, being criticized. Being alone, would I lose friends? Would I be resented? Would I feel like a fraud? The answers didn't come easily, but they came. And when they did, he understood something crucial. His fear wasn't irrational. It was relational, rooted in real experiences, real moments, real pain. So he didn't try to crush it. He didn't write it off. He made space for it. He placed both hands on the table and whispered, I know why you're scared. And I'm not here to fight you, I'm here to walk with you. And maybe that's the shift we're all waiting for, not from fear to fearlessness, but from fear to familiarity, from silence to softness. So pause, breathe, ask yourself, what part of you is afraid of being seen? And what might change if you saw it first? It was a Tuesday afternoon, nothing dramatic, no crisis, no breakthrough, just a mirror. And a man standing in front of it. Ethan had just come home from work. He was tired. He hadn't done anything particularly brave that day. But something in him felt heavy. He walked into the bathroom, looked at his reflection, and didn't look away, not for 2 seconds, not for a quick scan. He stayed, and that was new. He didn't adjust his posture, didn't suck in his stomach, didn't soften the lines in his forehead with a hopeful smile. He just looked. And for the first time, he didn't see a problem to fix. He saw a person to meet. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't cathartic, but it was real. Because sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is not run from our own gaze. It was there in that stillness that he realized how often he'd been skipping past himself in the name of progress, in the name of productivity, in the name of getting better. But all those efforts, they had one flaw: they assumed he was broken. And when you believe you're broken, even your healing becomes punishment. But that day the mirror didn't judge, it just reflected. And in that reflection, he saw weariness, but also softness. He saw fear, but also devotion, to keep going, to stay. He remembered being 17, looking in that same mirror, telling himself he had to change to be loved. And now, decades later, he whispered something different. You've always been enough, even when you didn't believe it. He didn't cry, he didn't smile, he just exhaled. And that exhale felt like home, not because everything was perfect, but because, finally, he wasn't leaving himself, not to chase approval, not to escape judgment, not to perform worth. He stayed with the discomfort, stayed with the awkwardness, stayed with the unfamiliar sensation of simply being seen. That moment didn't solve everything. It didn't erase the past, but it marked a shift. A new muscle being formed, not in the gym, but in the soul, the muscle of presence, of self-regard, of staying. And maybe that's where transformation truly begins, not in becoming someone else, but in finally looking at who you are and saying, "I'm not going anywhere." It started with coffee, not a grand revelation, not a sudden awakening, just a mug warm between his palms. And for the first time in months it tasted different, richer, slower, like he was there for it. Not scrolling, not analyzing, just sipping. That morning, Ethan didn't check his emails right away. He didn't rush to fix his life. He simply sat, listened to the birds outside his window, noticed the way the sun bent through the blinds, and something in him exhaled. Healing, he realized, wasn't a dramatic event. It was a quiet accumulation of small good things, moments he used to overlook. Now he let them stay. He bought a new plant, named it quietly like a secret. He started cooking again, nothing fancy, just enough to fill the kitchen with scent. He read poetry before bed, sometimes aloud, sometimes just with his fingers tracing the lines. And when fear visited, because it still did, he didn't brace, he nodded, said, "You can sit with me while I stir this soup." Because fear wasn't the enemy, it was just an old friend who didn't know the war was over. Each act, simple, ordinary, became sacred. A reclaiming of presence, a refusal to disappear. He smiled more, not for others, but because the silence between moments had softened. And one day he wrote again, not because he had something to prove, but because his voice missed the page. He didn't post it, didn't edit, he just wrote. And the words came like rain, soft, steady, unapologetic. They weren't profound, but they were honest, and honesty had become enough. That was new. Before, everything had to mean something. Now it just had to be felt. A friend called, invited him out. He said yes, not because he forced himself, but because something in him whispered, "I think we're ready." And even when the old panic stirred, the voice that once screamed now spoke softer. "You're safe." And maybe that's what all of this leads to. Not perfection, but permission to take joy seriously, to take slowness as medicine, to let the coffee taste like more than caffeine, to wake up and not rush into the noise, to feel the quiet and stay. And in that staying, something blooms, not loudly, but truly. A life, unhurried, unperformed, unhidden. And that, Ethan thought one evening, watching the plant he'd almost forgotten to water begin to bloom, is how healing looks when no one's watching. The first time Ethan didn't run was a Tuesday night in November. She had just told him she liked him, not in a grand, sweeping gesture, just a smile and a soft, "I like being around you." And everything in him wanted to vanish. He felt his stomach twist, his chest tighten, the shadow stirred, whispering its old lines. "This is where it falls apart. I'll see who you really are. You should leave before it gets messy." But this time, he didn't. He stayed, he took a breath and said, "That's hard for me to hear, but I'm really glad you said it. It wasn't polished, wasn't perfect. But it was honest." And that moment cracked something open. They started slow walks, long talks, coffee shops with half-finished books and stolen glances. Ethan didn't try to impress her. He let her see the awkward, the nervous, the overthinking, and she didn't flinch. He told her about the letters, the therapy, the mirror moments. She listened. Not like someone trying to fix him, like someone choosing to stay. It terrified him, but also calmed him, because for the first time, he wasn't performing intimacy, he was living it. And in the quiet moments, those that used to make him retreat, he began to lean in. There was one night he had a nightmare, woke up sweating, old fear gripping his chest. She was next to him, half asleep. She reached over and touched his hand and whispered, "You're here, it's okay." He believed her not because the fear was gone, but because he had someone to hold it with. That's what love became, not the absence of panic, but the presence of gentleness within it. He showed her his writing, not the polished drafts, the messy ones. The vulnerable ones. She cried at one, laughed at another, and said, "You don't have to be perfect for me to love you." He didn't respond right away, just looked at her. And for the first time in years believed it, not intellectually, but viscerally in his bones. That belief didn't erase the shadow, but it gave the shadow company. He still had doubts, still caught himself scanning for exits. But now he chose the door that led back in. He chose to stay, not just with her, but with himself. And every time he did, it got easier, not easy, easier. 3 small moments made it real. A morning she brought him coffee in bed, no words, just warmth. A Sunday when they disagreed and he didn't spiral. A rainy walk when she grabbed his hand and he didn't pull away. Mini story chain, tiny proofs of transformation. No fanfare, just presence. And one night, he sat beside her, looked at her laugh at some dumb show and whispered, "I used to think love meant I had to disappear. Now I think it means I finally get to stay." It didn't end with a breakthrough, or a big moment, or a final tearful goodbye to the past. It ended the way most healing does, quietly, with Ethan walking through his apartment, coffee in hand, sunlight on the floor, and nothing chasing him from within, no urgency, no panic, just stillness. That was the real win, not a life without fear, but a life where fear no longer held the map. He had learned to live with it, to love through it, to stay, even when every part of him said run. That's not willpower, that's wholeness. Because willpower is loud, but wholeness is steady. It doesn't demand, it doesn't perform, it just is. He no longer needed to prove anything, to earn anything, to outrun anything. He understood now. The parts of him that once broke things were never trying to break him, they were trying to save him, misguided maybe, but deeply loyal. And all they ever wanted was to be seen, so he saw them not just once, but every day, with every breath, every yes to joy, every no to fear-based silence. He became someone who could hold himself in the hard moments and still open his heart in the good ones. That, he realized, was the true transformation, not fixing the fear, but walking with it, not deleting the past, but honoring it, not waiting to feel ready, but showing up anyway. That's what staying means. And maybe that's what healing is, learning to stay, with the discomfort, with the beauty, with the love. With yourself. No more vanishing acts, no more sabotage, just presence, real, unpolished, enough. And if you're still here, if something in this story touched something in you, maybe it's time you stopped running too, not by force, but by choice. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally willing to ask the right questions. The kind that lead you inward, the kind that turn shadow into companion, the kind that sound like this. What part of me is trying to protect me, and what might happen if I thanked it? If this spoke to something inside you, comment below. I'm ready to stop running. Not for anyone else, just for you, because wholeness doesn't happen in a moment. It happens when you decide to stay. And if you do, this isn't the end, it's the beginning.